Yeah.
Well, essentially, the neoconservatives were the driving force for the American war in Iraq, and also, I guess you'd say, the driving force for the overall war agenda in the Middle East, which would also include Syria and Iran, although we haven't quite fully implemented the neoconservative agenda there yet. The neoconservative position has been closely tied with that of the Israeli right, that is, the Israeli Likudniks. And the fundamental goal of their strategy has been to weaken and destabilize Israel's enemies. And the goal is not simply to really only weaken Israel's external enemies, but by so weakening Israel's external enemies to also weaken Israel's internal enemy, the Palestinians. And perhaps many on the Israeli right perceive the Palestinians to be Israel's greatest danger, the threat to the Jewish state itself, not a threat in terms of weapons or anything, but a demographic threat. If these other Arab and Islamic states are weakened, they would not be able to provide any material or moral support to the Palestinians. If the Palestinians were weakened, they would be unable to resist and would ultimately accede to any type of solution that the Israeli government offered them. So essentially, both the neocons and the Likudniks were thinking in terms of a comprehensive solution for all of Israel's security needs, dealing with both Israel's external enemies and their internal enemy, the Palestinians. And I might say that these ideas originated in Israel. For example, in 1982, Oded Yinon put forth such ideas that Israel should use its military power to destabilize and fragment Israel's enemies. This was put forth, as I said, in 1982 during the Begin administration, when, of course, Begin did invade Lebanon, and perhaps that was, though it failed, some historians have contended there was a broader plan intended there to affect more of the Middle East to advance Israeli security. I might say that the late Israel Shahak translated Yinon's study and into English, and the name of the translation was the Zionist Plan for the Middle East. Well, the neoconservatives essentially picked up on this type of idea, and they actually proposed such a measure to the incoming Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, in 1996. This was the clean break study. This also called for Israel to use military means to weaken its enemies. And some of the authors of this study were Richard Pearl, David Wormser, and Douglas Feith. And, of course, these people who were in 1996 advising the Israeli Prime Minister would be part of the Bush II administration and play significant roles in bringing about the war on Iraq. Just want to point out that in both Yinon and study and a clean break, there was an emphasis on attacking Iraq first, that Iraq was a key, let's say, a geostrategic location for Israel to destabilize all of its enemies in the Middle East. Now, after 1996, the neoconservatives started to emphasize that the threat wasn't simply to Israel, but it was a threat to the United States, that there was a terrorist threat from the Islamic and Arab countries and groups in the Middle East, that the United States had to do something about it. The fundamental threat, they emphasized, came from Saddam Hussein in Iraq. So the different neocon think tanks and media outlets were promoting this idea. However, the neocons wouldn't really be able to have the U.S. government implement this plan until they would become part of the executive branch. And, of course, this took place in 2001 with the incoming George W. Bush administration, and Vice President Dick Cheney played a major role in bringing the neocons into the administration. Now, many people have described Cheney as a oil man, and to some extent he has been, but Cheney was very closely connected to the neocons. He was a member of the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. He was a charter member of the Project for the New American Century, PNAC. His wife, Lynn Cheney, has worked for the American Enterprise Institute. So Cheney did have this connection to the neocons, brought him aboard. However, initially, at the beginning of the Bush administration, the neocons were still, they didn't hold the top rung. They couldn't get what they wanted. They couldn't get a war in Iraq, which they were pushing. They couldn't get that pushed through right away because they were checked by Secretary of State Colin Powell and the State Department bureaucracy. Many other career bureaucrats and military brass were cool about such a military attack. So it wasn't until 9/11. That sort of pushed up the neocon position, enabled them to gain dominance in the Bush administration. The 9/11 sort of frightened the American people. It also made them angry. They wanted to strike out at their enemies, although they weren't quite sure who the enemy was. Many American people confused Osama bin Laden with Saddam Hussein. But the administration itself, others besides the neocons, were looking for some plan to enact. The neocons had one to attack Iraq, and of course the neocons, were able to persuade, to convert President George W. Bush to their position. Bush isn't really that knowledgeable on foreign policy. He looks for more simple solutions. The neocons had that solution of good, America good, versus the evil Islamic terrorists. So Bush was a convert, and as a result of propaganda, which you know all about, the weapons of mass destruction, in part pushed by the Office of Special Plans there, Doug Feist, neocon Doug Feist shop, the neocons in the government and also outside were able to frighten the American people to believe that America would actually be attacked by Saddam, and then, of course, that led to America ultimately attacking Iraq.